Our second speaker is getting ready to talk. This is Amy Willoughby. Amy is a research scientist at the University of Washington's Cooperative Institute for Climate, Ocean, and Ecosystem Studies, or CECOS for short, and is an affiliate at NOAA Fisheries Alaska Fisheries Science Center based in Seattle, Washington. She earned her bachelor's degree in liberal studies and a minor in environmental science with a concentration on biology at the University of Central Florida. And her recent endeavors involve investigating bowhead and gray whale carcasses documented during an aerial survey program in the Arctic to determine the probable cause of death for these whales. So without further ado, please let me introduce you to Amy, who's going to give us a very interesting talk, I'm sure. Welcome, Amy.
Great, thank you very much for that introduction. Oh, let's see, let's get started here. Okay. Okay, can everybody hear me? Are we looking good?
Yes, it looks great.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Okay, so hello, I'm Amy Willoughby, and yep, I'm a researcher at the University of Washington's Cooperative Institute for Climate, Ocean, and Ecosystem Studies, and I work at NOAA at the Marine Mammal Lab. And Casey did such a great job introducing me, so I'm just going to jump in and just highlight a couple things. Before studying marine mammals, I had the opportunity to work with Cape ground squirrels and sea turtles, marbled murrelets and salmon, and that gave me a nice diverse background in different sorts of research. And then starting in 2014, I got a job working with the Aerial Surveys of Arctic Marine Mammals project. And when I started working in the Arctic, it was during a time of rapid change, and this change was associated with the loss of sea ice caused by human accelerated climate change. And that loss of sea ice in the high Arctic was making the high Arctic more accessible to the ocean, one of the ocean's greatest predators, killer whales. So looking back just 7 years ago, when I joined the ASAM project in 2014, records showed that killer whales did not hunt bowhead whales in northern Alaskan waters. And as far as scientists knew, killer whales and bowhead whale interactions had never been witnessed or heard of. And that included scientists who work closely with Alaska natives who have thousands of years of indigenous knowledge. So we are discussing the Bering Chukchi Beaufort Sea stock of bowhead whales who are classified as endangered. Most of them overwinter in the Bering Sea, and in summer they migrate north with the retreating sea ice and then eastward to their summer feeding grounds in the Beaufort Sea, returning again to the Bering in autumn. They are important cultural, nutritional, and spiritual resources for 11 Alaska whaling communities who hunt them for subsistence. And subsistence hunts are carefully managed by the Alaska Eskimo Whaling Commission and the National Marine Fisheries Service as sanctioned by the International Whaling Commission. Over here on the right, you can see the seasonal range of the BCB bowhead whales based on satellite tracking data. And over here in this red bracket, in this above Alaska there, excuse me, is the ASAM study area. And we'll discuss that a little bit more in a few minutes. So bowhead whales are the only large whale to inhabit the Arctic and subarctic waters year-round. Wintering in the Bering Sea subarctic sea ice offers bowhead whales both winter feeding opportunities and refuge from predators. Bowhead whales are well adapted for life in the icy water, thanks to their thick layer of blubber and their giant bow-shaped heads, which not only give them their name, but also allow them to break through thick sea ice to access air. And bowhead whales are long-lived. Does anybody happen to know how long they can live till? Well, 200 years, and that probably makes them the oldest living marine mammal, or excuse me, mammals on the planet. They can reach reproductive maturity between the age of 20 and 25, and females can have calves approximately every 3 to 4 years. At birth, calves are approximately 12 feet in length, and they can double in size during their first year. And they can grow to be about 60 feet long. And all bowhead whales, or excuse me, bowhead whales are all part of the baleen whale family. And over here on the right is a picture of a baleen hanging from the top jaw of a bowhead whale. And some of these baleen can grow to be 15 feet in length. And they use this baleen to filter large amounts of ocean water to collect zooplankton like krill and copepods. And over here on the left, or excuse me, on the right is a photo of a krill that I photographed in October. And it's a little bit smaller than the ones Rob was talking about just a few minutes ago. So through the years, there have been several theories and findings about bowhead whale evolution and migration. And right now we're closer than ever to being able to prove or disprove some of these theories. And that includes that bowhead whales use predator avoidance is one of the reasons that we can possibly explain why bowheads leave the nutrient-rich Bering Sea for areas farther north. Annually, bowhead whales follow the retreating sea ice north and then east into the Beaufort, and it's likely that they stay near the sea ice because killer whales here avoid dense sea ice for fear of entrapment, and that the sea ice against their dorsal fins restricts their mobility. Also, warm areas are thought to be poor killer whale habitat. And instead of migrating to and calving in warm waters like other baleen whales, bowheads likely evolved an alternative predator avoidance strategy by instead wintering and calving near sea ice. And this next one's pretty cool. The structure of their brain indicates that they likely evolved under low predation pressure. So as it is, bowhead whales don't have the part of the brain that triggers avoidance behaviors when the odors of predators are detected, as seen in other species. And that suggests that they probably evolved under low predation pressure. But all of these things hinge on one thing, and that's sea ice. And that's the very thing that is melting away at an unprecedented rate. So again, my talk is titled Listening to Dead Bowhead Whales, A Story of Death and New Discoveries. And for me to tell you this story, I'll first start with some background information on aerial survey data collection and introduce our antagonist, the killer whale. And then we'll go into some study questions and methods and discuss the results and conclusions and some final thoughts. So aerial surveys use small aircraft to survey large areas of marine mammal habitat. The survey plane was outfitted with a left and right bubble window that allowed 2 marine mammal observers unobstructed views from underneath the plane all the way out to the horizon. In the back sat a data recorder who entered survey data onto a computer. And right here, you can see what the data entry station looks like over here on the far right. And in these photos, I think you can see the bubble windows in this middle photo there. The bubble windows stick out and the observers can stick their head into those windows. ASAM had 2 survey teams based in Alaska. One was based in Utqiagvik, formerly Barrow, and that team usually focused primarily on the Chukchi Sea. And then another team was in Dead Horse, and they focused on the Beaufort Sea. In the top right, you can see a geographical area of North America with the ASAM study area featured there, and then it's zoomed in this figure underneath. Surveys were conducted from July to October. And for this presentation, we're going to be focusing on the years from 2009 to 2018. But it's worth mentioning that the ASAM data set is has over 41 years of seasonal data, and the first surveys were flown in 1979. So survey flights consisted of transect lines flown at 1,300 feet. And you can think of transect lines kind of like mowing your lawn, but instead you're flying over the water, surveying the surface of the water for animals. While on transect, the observers searched for sightings of animals and called out the sighting information for the data recorder to enter. Most large whales were circled to gather more detailed information and to sometimes take photos, and that includes dead whales. And circling means that they left the transect line, they flew over to the whale, and then they orbited over top to get more information. On the right here is a figure of what a 2-flight day in 2017 looked like. And you can see the transect lines going out. They were surveyed both in the Beaufort Sea and the Chukchi. And then you can see these different symbols represent the different animals that they saw in the location where they saw them. And also something that's kind of interesting is that in an average season, ASAM flew approximately 35,000 miles on transect, and that's equivalent to 1.4 times around the planet at the equator. So why do aerial surveys? Well, aerial surveys allow researchers to detect changes in density, distribution, and behavior of marine mammals. They can provide real-time information on marine mammals and the environmental conditions. And they offer a wide range context for understanding marine mammal ecology. And all of this can aid in making informed management decisions. So documenting carcasses, when this aerial survey team came across a carcass of a large whale, they would mark the whale's location from the transect line, and then they would divert over and circle over top. While circling the whale, the left observer would obtain photographs, and that would help us confirm species ID and then allow us to get a better look at what was going on once we were back on the ground. After the flight, all that information was compiled into a stranding report, which was sent out and shared with interested local, state, and federal agencies. So reasons to document carcasses is that they provide valuable information that can help to improve our scientific understanding of a species and its ecosystem. And that information can help us direct future biological and ecological research. So while we were on survey, we collected data on all marine mammals, but we were particularly interested in bowhead whales and killer whales, and for this talk, carcasses. So some threats to bowhead whales include pollution, but in addition to that is climate change, which has led to the rapid loss of sea ice in our polar regions. In this figure on the left, the white area represents the annual low extent of sea ice in 1980. Each year, this sea ice is measured at its maximum extent in winter and its lowest extent in late summer. And the purple area here represents what was remaining of that sea ice and how much it's shrunken in 2020. And for reference here, in this red area is, again, the ASAM survey boundary, and you can see how much sea ice would have been in that study area during our study period time, but back in the 1980s and probably into the 90s. And then also note that as of recently, there's almost no sea ice within the survey area. So this loss of sea ice has resulted in longer open water seasons, which means in some places 6 weeks to 4 months of additional open water time, which intensifies additional threats to bowhead whales. And those threats can include vessel strikes, which is when a ship collides with a whale. And as the Arctic becomes more accessible to human activities, shipping is expected to increase. Also entanglement, which is when a whale becomes entangled in commercial fishing gear, is also expected to increase in the coming years. And ecological regime shifts is when there's a large, abrupt, and persistent change to the structure and functions of an ecosystem. And this could have significant implications where it could potentially affect bowhead whales' ability to access food and where their food is coming from and the quality of that food, seasonality of it. And perhaps that could also lead to increased competition for resources amongst other large baleen whales who are also moving north with this loss of sea ice. And then lastly is noise pollution. From all of this increased human activity, it's resulting in a louder underwater soundscape. And that may affect bowhead whales' ability to locate food and navigate and find mates. And really important to this talk is their ability to detect predators. So some predator threats to bowheads include polar bears, who might occasionally kill a young bowhead whale calf if it were to become entrapped in sea ice. However, we think that polar bear predation is probably fairly low. The next would be killer whale predation, and that threat is high. Interactions between killer whales and bowhead whales in the eastern Chukchi and western Beaufort Seas has not been directly reported or witnessed, as I explained earlier. But in Alaska, the number of bowhead whales who have been taken during subsistence hunting, whose bodies bore the scars of killer whales, did sharply increase from the years 2002 to 2012 compared to the previous 10 years. And so those whales survived their run-in with killer whales, and we don't know where along their migratory route that they came in contact with killer whales, but this does suggest that there's an increase in the interactions between the two species. So killer whales have been documented preying on bowhead whales in most other areas of their geographical range. And in this figure here, the teal color represents all of the bowhead whale range. And in these little killer whale symbols are the locations where killer whales are known to prey on bowhead whales. And again, you'll see the red brackets here, that's the ASAM study area, and you'll see that there's not a killer whale symbol there. So killer whales are found in all of the world's oceans. And there are three main types in the North Pacific. There's the residents, who primarily eat fish, and the transients, who primarily eat other marine mammals, and then the offshores, who eat fish, sharks, and probably marine mammals as well. But we're going to be focusing and talking about the transient killer whales, or the marine mammal eaters. And they're apex predators, meaning that they're at the top of their food chain. And they live in highly socialized groups called pods, and they are organized hunters, and family units have been known to form specialized hunting strategies. And killer whales are capable of killing large whales. And in this area of the Arctic, the study area that we're referring to during this talk, killer whales hunting gray whales along the Chukchi Sea coast is well documented. So how can these killer whales take down a large whale? Well, attacking killer whales have been reported to bite and hold on to the whale's flippers and tail flukes, and they're trying to immobilize the prey and slow it down. They've also been known to drown the whales by holding them under the water and covering their blowholes. And killer whales can ram the whale's ribs and underside, which likely causes hemorrhaging and rib fracture. And all of this will lead to death. And then once the killer whales have taken down their large prey, they tend to focus on eating the tongue of the whale and the blubber, which have the most calories. So in these figures here, A and B, this is still shots taken from a video of a colleague of mine in Russia who filmed an attack by killer whales on a bowhead. And A and B, you can see that the killer whale's up out of the water, pushing the whale down. And then over here in C, this gray area is the bowhead whale upside down and dead. And then also this in front of it is this white and black thing, and it's the killer whale, and it's also upside down but very alive and inside the bowhead whale's mouth eating it. So we had a bit of a game changer in 2015, where we had this this bowhead whale calf with wounds from killer whales. And this article sort of highlights the thought of the times pretty well, where it says here, barrow whalers Holland bonus bowhead killed by unknown causes. And this was happening shortly after a few bowhead whale carcasses had been noted with similar injuries to the ones that we had seen on gray whales, and those gray whales had been classified as killer whale predation. But then these bowheads that sort of presented with these similar wounds were classified as cause of death unknown. But that's because at the time, our best available knowledge in science is that killer whales were not preying on bowhead whales in this area, and that bowheads sort of are leaving the Bering Sea and coming here as a predator avoidance strategy. And we're hopefully doing it successfully. But here's some of these two little highlights here of the times is that scientists and whalers examine the whale, say that it was not killed by hunters, and that two possible culprits are an attack by killer whales, something that might be on the rise in Arctic waters as sea ice retreats or ship strike. And then it goes on further that this indigenous knowledge that is so valuable, that there was this whaling captain who said that that was even the first time he had heard of a killer whale preying on a bowhead in this area. So this was all a time of rapid change. In these two highlighted areas, you can see on the peck, you can see rake marks, and that's where the teeth of the killer whales have dragged onto the peck here, and that's showing basically probably that it was holding onto it, slowing it down. And then in the mouth area, you can see that there's some wounds associated with killer whale predation. So in the years that followed, killer whale predation on bowheads was increasing, and by the 2018 season, we had come to accept it as an annual occurrence. But what was really going on? And as a scientist, what do you do when you have all this contradicting information to what your existing knowledge is? And so the steps are to formulate questions, design a way to answer them, and then hopefully publish a paper and change what our current knowledge is. So moving into the next part of my talk is going to be our study questions and methods. So one of our big questions was, when did killer whales start preying on bowheads in the northeastern Chukchi and western Beaufort Seas? And then how significant was this killer whale predation on bowhead whales in this portion of their range and for this time period? And then was killer whale predation increasing? So to answer these questions, I gathered the available data, and the earliest data I could use began in 2009, which was when the collection of carcass data was standardized. And it's also a time when both the Chukchi and the Beaufort Sea were experiencing similar survey effort. And from there, I compiled all the carcasses together and found that we had a sample size of 33 carcasses, and 25 of them were in the Chukchi Sea, and 8 were in the Beaufort Sea. So the next step was to, well, this wasn't the next step, but what I did next was I enlisted the help of one of my co-authors, Dr. Rafaela Stimmelmeyer, who is a wildlife veterinarian with the North Slope Boroughs Department of Wildlife Management, to help me come up with a way to classify a set of criteria for classifying cause of death. And together we came up with, the first one was probable killer whale predation, which was when imagery contained enough visual evidence of serious injuries consistent with killer whale predation to support that mortality was caused by killer whales. And in the bottom image here, you can see both damage to the left and right pectorals, and that's probably again for slowing down the whale. And then they got into the whale's mouth. There's wounds on the jawline and tongue area. And then next was aboriginal subsistence hunting, which was classified based on the imagery review or actual examination of a carcass, the timing of hunting activity and proximity to a reported struck and lost whale. And please note that Aboriginal subsistence hunting is extremely successful, but the Arctic is a very harsh place to be, and these whales are very large. When struck and lost whales do occur, great effort goes into retrieving those whales. And in this photo, you can see that this whale the whalers were able to get a line attached and a buoy before losing it. And then the last is could not be determined. And this just happened when either there were minor injuries or there were no injuries. It was too decomposed. And this photo here demonstrates this whale looks really good. There's nothing wrong. It exploded, but that's just part of the normal decomposition of whales, more mass, more gas, and then the whale goes boom. So the next part of our study was for both of us to conduct a systematic review of bowhead whale carcasses to assign one of the 3 probable causes of death. And it wasn't long before we found out that these bowheads still have a story to tell. So I'm going to move into the results and then slide into some final thoughts. So of the 33 bowhead whale carcasses from 2009 to 2018, all of which are plotted in this figure, 18 of them were classified as probable killer whale predation, and those are all indicated with black squares. There were 15 in the Chukchi and 3 in the Beaufort Sea. 4 of them were classified as Aboriginal subsistence hunting, and those are shown in red. And 2 of the 4 that I know of were salvaged. The whalers actually found them on the water and brought them in and were able to salvage the muktuk and baleen and bones, and lots of scientific information was collected from those carcasses by the North Slope Bureau. And then 11 of them we couldn't determine what the cause of death was. For fun here, I also plotted all of ASAM's killer whale sightings, and those are in white stars. And the first killer whale sighting in the ASAM data set occurred in 2012, and then annually from 2015 to 2018. And you'll remember that these surveys started in 1979, although survey effort varied and location varied. I think that it's still pretty neat that the first ones weren't until 2012. And another thing to note is the amount of carcasses that are found over the water versus on land. And 75% of our carcasses were floating on the ocean. And it's highly unlikely that any of these would have been documented without these surveys. And that would have been a lot of untold stories. But also too, we might not be able to say, come to these conclusions that we have been able to find through this study if those hadn't been documented. So scientists for the first time had the first evidence of killer whale predation on bowhead whales in the northeastern Chukchi and western Beaufort Seas from 2009 to 2018. And so now we can get to these answers here. So our first was when did the first predation event happen? And so that was in 2010 was actually the first carcass that had signs of killer whale predation. And that was followed by 2012 and 2013, and then annually 2015, 16, 17, and 18. And then our other question was, how significant was killer whale predation? So it turns out that it was the most frequent cause of death for bowhead whale carcasses that were photographed and subsequently examined. So pretty significant. A little harder to answer was to be able to determine if predation was increasing. So we can say that from 2009 to 2018, there were a series of ups and downs, but then there was annual regularity from 2015 to 2018. And we can't speak to the years before 2009 because we don't have standardized carcass collection data, and the survey effort wasn't as comparable. But we can rely back on other empirical information, which is indigenous knowledge, which is of great value. Hadn't reported any killer whale interactions with bowheads, but had noted, that they're preying on gray whales. And also the scientists at the North Slope Burrow had documented an increase in killer whale scarring on bowhead whales hunted from 2002 to 2012. And then additionally, we have this passive acoustic data from other studies that shows that transient killer whale presence in these waters has been increasing since at least 2009. And that gives us reason to believe that predation is also likely increasing in this area. Killer whales aren't just coming all the way up to the Arctic on the off chance that they'll find food or not. They're coming up here with a reason, and I guess maybe that's my opinion, but I say that it's energetically worth their while to come there and eat and not just be on a joyride. So what's probably driving this change is the loss of sea ice is allowing the killer whales a greater amount of time and further range within this region. And that's leading to an increase in overlap with bowhead whales. And then bowhead whales, who's one of their avoidance strategies is to run to sea ice. Well, they don't have that sea ice to rely on for safety as they did for previously did for millennia. Over here in this image, so we'll circle back to this image of the decreased sea ice, and you see the study area. And so this all sort of brings that picture sort of together of what's going on. So as I explained earlier, that documenting carcasses can help us better understand an ecosystem and a species and to direct further research efforts. And so this study sort of highlights that, because now we can say that our future research needs are going to be to try to determine how bowhead whale behavior and distribution may change if killer whales are present annually in summer and fall. And then also to define and quantify the non-consumptive impacts to bowhead whales. And those are non-consumptive impacts, or impacts that are not associated with death. Killer whale presence can affect an entire group of bowhead whales, not just the one that they target. So, and also preliminary findings from other bowhead stocks suggest that this non-consumptive impact might be significant. And then we're also going to want to know who these killer whales are, where are they coming from, how many of them are associated with killer whale predation in this region, and are they just opportunistically hunting bowheads, or are they going to begin to specialize? And to address all of these questions or these items is that we need to understand the seasonal abundance and distribution of killer whales. And so that will need to be studied. And also up for grabs out there is to be the first person to actually witness firsthand killer whales preying on bowhead whales. So some final thoughts is that we know this killer whale predation is the most frequent, or was the most frequent cause of death for bowhead whales in the ASAM study area from 2009 to 2018. And although these surveys aren't happening anymore, this data may help identify shifts in bowhead whale mortality surrounding concerns of increased human activity in the Arctic. And this is a new and important piece of bowhead whale life history. It's something that is either we didn't know was happening, and indication is that this is likely something that is relatively new, but it's something that we can account for now moving on to the future. And really importantly is that this is likely the direct effect of human accelerated climate change. And that underscores that what you do at your house, what I do here in Everett, Washington, contributes to climate change. And it's far reaching. And in this case, it's the delicate dance between predator and prey. And not to feel hopeless or, everybody's talking about climate change and all these talks, but we all can play a part in trying to reduce those effects. And that can be reducing your ecological footprint or joining the STEM fields that are looking for ways to reduce climate change. And then also to become a steward of the land and sea. And you can do that at home, in your community, at your school. Every little bit helps. And so I guess with that brings me to the end here. And so we can make one last update to this presentation, and we can update this map to show that we have evidence of killer whale predation in the Chukchi and Beaufort Seas now. And I just want to take a moment to thank so many people. It's a huge effort to put on these aerial surveys, and then so I want to thank my co-authors, and I want to thank BOEM for funding us, and my employers, Clearwater Air, who provided our aircraft, the North Slope Borough, Sitka Sound Science Center, and the Whale Fest teams and sponsors. And so that's it.
All right, thank you, Amy. That was fascinating. And also, I love how all the speakers have taken the opportunity to give some advice to the younger generation and encourage people to get involved. And I don't remember if we prompted you to do that, but everyone's done it and it's been great. So thank you for that. We can transition into the Q&A now, and I think everyone knows the drill, but I'll say it again. In the whova.com page or app, there's a Q&A panel. It looks like we've got a bunch of questions in there already. So I'll just dive in here, Amy, if you're ready.
Okay.
And the top one, the most highly voted question right now is it safe to say now that orca predation on bowhead whales in the Arctic is the new normal? And do you think that this will drive bowhead whales in the Arctic to extinction?
Oh, well, I can say pretty confidently that I think that it's continuing to happen. So our data set only goes back to 2009. So for the time period from 2009 to today, that is the new norm, that killer whales are preying on bowhead whales. But I definitely can't speak to if it'll lead to their bowhead whale extinction. And I would go out on a limb to say no. I don't think it would be a behoove of the killer whales to overdo it. I don't know that's even a possibility, but there's a whole lot of other factors that could influence that. But I'm gonna say no.
Good, I like that. Here's an interesting one. So we know that in some ways right whales share a lot of the similar characteristics, at least in their morphology, to bowhead whales. And this person says, are right whale brains similar to bowheads in that aspect that you mentioned about their predator avoidance? And do we think that could have contributed to their vulnerability to commercial whaling?
Ooh, those are good questions. Well, we know that right whales are the cousin to bowhead whales. You'd have to look at probably evolution when they evolved. But I would go out on a limb to say that I don't think that the evolution of it and commercial whaling would be linked together. But that's a great question, and I can try to answer some of this a little bit more detail afterwards.
Yeah, well, and you have to think that maybe if you had some innate response to a predator that had been around for millions of years along with you, you could develop that. But with something that sort of developed so quickly, like whaling, especially commercialized whaling.
Yeah, a couple hundred years for boats, in comparison to millions of years for evolution.
Yeah, good question though. Here's one that says, how long can bowhead carcasses float at the surface, and how far is it possible for them to drift from where they died?
That's also one of a question that we would love to have answered. In the Arctic, the water is so cold, but then the whales have this are so well insulated. They have this thick layer of blubber, and so I don't have the answer to that. We know that they can persist for a good period of time. We've had beached carcasses that we've seen 2 years in a row. Their skeletons by the next season. And then we did document one that drifted across the Beaufort Sea over a course of about a month. But without us knowing exactly where the whale died, there's no way for us to know how far it can drift and or where it could drift from or what direction it would go. All of that sort of hinges on predominant prevailing winds during that time period, and it's a less to do with currents. So it's just, we'd have to really pinpoint get some pinpointed information to answer that.
And working in the Arctic is so hard anyway. And then
Yes.
trying to get at some of these detailed questions just can be so tricky.
But it is on our mind of how long they can persist and whatnot.
Sure. All right. How long does the process of killer whales killing a whale take on average?
I don't know. I mean, I guess it depends on how skilled the group is, how many of them there are, the size of the whale that they take on. Do they take on a mom and a calf where they have to fight off mom to get the calf? But there's other documentation that I've seen where it's hours. But then I guess if you got a couple good blows in and the right artery or the right hemorrhaging spot, I mean, I think it could be a little swifter, but I think that it takes a bit of time.
Yeah. Here's one that says, what transient pods are being seen up in the Arctic? Which is to say, do we know who these killer whales are? Are they in our records?
We don't. There's a new acoustic study that recently came out that at least can confirm that we're dealing with transients based on different click patterns. And I think that that's something that's going to be able to be answered sooner than later here. And so that's kind of exciting. But yes, knowing who they are and where they're coming from and how many of them, are they the same whales or are these different whales that are exploring, will be really interesting to find out. But our best guess is they're probably from the Bering Sea stock. But other people have thrown out, could they be coming over from Russia? We really just don't have that answer. We did have one in 2012. We had one male that was photographed and was matched to a whale that was known down in the Aleutian Islands around False Pass. So there was one whale that was matched, but generally we don't know the answer yet.
Interesting. Here's a question that says, what effect might this new kind of predation have on subsistence whaling? And I'm thinking both what you said about the consumptive effects and the abundance, but also maybe the non-consumptive effects, new behavior of the bowhead whales.
Yeah, that is something that as we're sort of assessing and digesting this new information, that is going to be on the horizon for people. Right now, we don't think that it's going to be, we don't think it's a big enough factor, but you're right, and that's one of the things we want to know is their behavior going to change? Are they going to be farther offshore? And yeah, it's a good question, and that's part of that future research needs.
And this next one ties in a little bit to that as well. And this person asked, are killer whales consuming only part of the bowhead carcass, and are subsistence hunters able to use the parts that are left if the whale's fresh enough?
Right. Yes. Technically, yes. But that would have to be during the time. One, the whale carcass would have to be close enough to shore that it could be accessed. And then secondly, they'd have to come across it. They'd have to be on the water. And I'm not sure if they have a set time or if they could collect it at any time. I imagine it's any time. I don't know the full answer to that, but I do know that they will salvage what they can, like that little calf. I think they brought that calf in that was found. So yeah, salvaging is definitely a possibility.
Right. All right, so in places where killer whale predation has been observed or determined to be happening on bowheads, is there a size or age preference? Are they mostly going for calves or adults or males or females?
So I think generally speaking, they are more likely to target the smaller whales. But from our study, I can speak to that the best. And in our study, we had the 18 that were classified as probable killer whale predation, but only 8 of those were classified as calves or yearlings. So they're not just targeting young whales, but I don't believe any of them were long enough to be adults, but subadults and juveniles, yes.
Okay, great. And let's cram one more because I'm going to combine 2 questions in here before we finish up. People are wondering what the status of the bowhead population up there is right now. Is it stable or declining or increasing? And on the same alliance, is the current take by humans or killer whales sustainable for this population?
Yeah, Yeah, so right now, the Bering Sea stock of, or excuse me, the BCB stock of bowhead whales, I think is classified as a sort of a climate change winner right now. Their food source is booming, and they're doing pretty well. With regard to, wait, what, I'm missing the second part of the question.
It was just whether the current take by killer whales
Oh
and
yeah, so
indigenous hunting is
thank
sustainable.
you. Yeah, so that's monitored and regulated, and there's these calculations that go on, and every 5 years there's a new abundance estimate that is conducted, and I actually got to participate in that in 2019. And I think the new the estimate is around 18,000 animals, but all of this information from ship strike and their how long they live and their survival rates, all of that are computed into some sort of supercomputer math type thing for them to figure out what the removable allowable amount is for sustaining the population, and that's monitored pretty strictly and agreed upon.
Great. Well, that's all the time we have for questions. So thank you everyone who submitted and voted on them. Thank you, Amy, for some really interesting answers and a great talk.